several people in my life who have either passed or have dealt with chronic illness or are disabled, and so death has been a much bigger part of my young life than perhaps it is for a lot of people. My name is Isabella Carr, and I am the founder of Deathfat Doula, and I'm the former engagement fellow for Compassion & Choices. So I started taking just workshops and doula trainings, and I very, very quickly found that I had an interest in a sort of niche that wasn't well represented in end-of-life care, which is a focus on people in bigger bodies and fat people. So weight stigma impacts people's experiences of illness and dying in a lot of different ways. We see a lot of trends which are backed by substantive data that show that in general, people in bigger bodies and fat people do not receive equitable healthcare generally. People are not getting the same access to screenings. They're not getting as much time with their doctors. There's tons of data that support that doctors have worse feelings about their fat patients. Fat people are just going into these care conversations at a disadvantage. They're not always believing fat people when they talk about their pain, or they're just frequently attributing any sort of ill health to weight. We also see that for hospice, for people who are fat or in bigger bodies are often admitted into hospice much later than their thin counterparts. And so they get less time there. And that also means they get less time to grapple with a terminal diagnosis and get their affairs in order. There are many facilities that don't have bariatric Hoyers, so they're not always able to transport people safely or easily. They may not have bariatric hospice or hospital beds. So you also have people who are not being kept as comfortable at end of life. It's difficult to get transportable, collapsible home hospice beds, so that you'll have people in bigger bodies who are not able to die at home. So I was inspired to start Deathfat Doula when I began my doula training in 2019 and 2020. Honestly, kind of shocked that no one was really talking about this. In general, death care workers are doing really great work to expand how we think of different cultures, different religions, different races, different gender identities, different sexual orientations at the end of life, to really include all these different ways people live into their end-of-life practices. And yet, there is still this large portion of the population that's not included in these conversations and doesn't get the same sort of explicit care and thought. And so when I started to think about what my doula practice would be, it became very clear to me that I needed to focus on fat people explicitly. And so death fat for me is a really important term that recognizes people and gives them agency and the ability to name who they are and their experience, but that also holds space for this connection to death that can be really distressing for people. So many people spent perhaps the majority of their lives being told that they're going to die because of their body, that would inevitably have spiritual and theological and emotional impacts on them. And I'm giving them the space to think about what it means to be in these specific kinds of bodies. So the guidance I would provide fat people or the loved ones of fat people who are considering end of life and are approaching the planning process is to think about some of your practical constraints, but to not let it totally eclipse what you want. There's a lot of possibility, even on smaller budgets or even in areas where you may not have a ton of different service providers to choose from, that you can still have the end of life plan, care, and celebration that you want. I would also encourage them to think about who are people in their life who are going to be great advocates for them, particularly if they're incapacitated or not able to make medical decisions. People who are willing to stand up in the face of that stigma in medical care and end-of-life care. I recommend that people call your local crematoriums, call your local funeral homes, call your local cemeteries, and just ask them simply, can you accommodate certain bodies? Are there weight limits? Are there dimension limits? Is there an associated cost? Are there upcharges? I really would encourage you to start doing that work when you can, to come up with a general plan, knowing that it may not always be executed perfectly, but that you can have your death plan ready to go. It may be difficult for you to get the providers that you want and the information that you need, but it doesn't mean that you can't still have a better end-of-life process or something more aligned with your personal wishes.